everyone, and happy Sabbath or happy Vesper. Let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this precious opportunity of studying the translations and versions of the Bible. Give us enlightenment that we may understand it and choose the best version for our personal study. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We will not follow the suggested reading because most of them have been covered in our nightly discussion. Instead, I'll be presenting to you an important dimension of hermeneutics which has something to do with practical usage of the scriptures. And that is none other than translations and versions. I will be reading many texts to give you examples from the writers themselves who did translations of their messages. And then I will share with you the three kinds of translations, and then you can choose your own versions. Okay, number one, Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 8, you notice that in this verse, Nehemiah, I should say Ezra, was the one reading, but he also assigned people to translate what he was reading. They read from the book, from the law of God clearly, and they gave the sense so that the people understood. Who are the they? They are the translators. So when Ezra read the scriptures, he has translators in a way that the message have reached the farthest listener of Ezra. They gave sense. In other words, they interpreted the scriptures that it touched their feelings and they were moved by the inspired writing. Another is Matthew 1:23. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. So that means the word there that is not very much familiar with the listener was translated in order for the listener to understand it. So that's the purpose of translation, to make meaning clearer. Mark 5:41, taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talita kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. Thus Jesus himself has actually translated the word Talita kumi. Okay, translation. Mark 15:34, and they brought him to the place called Golgotha. In close parentheses, that's the translation, which means place of a skull. See, the meaning of the word becomes clear. At the ninth hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lima sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? So these are just examples of writers themselves have translated words to make it clearer. And he brought him to Jesus, and when he beheld him, he said, Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah, thou shalt be called Cephas, which is by interpretation a stone. So the word Cephas, according to the sender, Jesus Christ, a stone. That's translation. See? And said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, cross parentheses, which is by interpretation sent. Okay? He went his way therefore and washed and came seeing. John 9:7. So the word Siloam was translated, which means sent. Another example from Paul, Acts 9:36. Now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds which she did. Tabitha means Dorcas, or full of good works. That's the translation. Acts 13:8 by Elymas the sorcerer, in close parentheses, for so is his name by interpretation, withstood them, seeking to turn away the deputy from the faith. Another example of interpretation from the writers or from the speaker himself. Hebrews 7:12, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace. Okay? So king of Salem, king of peace are the same. King of righteousness, referring to Jesus Christ. There are challenges, however, in the translations of the scriptures. Number one to that is the bridging of the various barriers of the translators. So imagine the gaps of time of Moses, then the translator will translate it on our time, thousands of years, and then the culture, then the geography, very vast gap. Okay, that's one challenge. And then the change of socio-economic political situations. At that time, the writings of the scriptures are totally different from our socio-economic political situations. And then the different thought patterns. So Hebrew writers have different thought patterns. Example, in our time, we are educated to reason from cause to effect. The Hebrews reason from effect to cause. So that's the problem. There are translations there. And number four, the differences in language themselves. This is the most challenging in translation. A good example provided for us from our textbook, the Adventist Handbook of Theology. In Hebrew verb, the emphasis is on the state. You see, verb, action, words. You see, in Greek verb, the emphasis is action. You see, and in English verb, the emphasis is on time. Totally different emphasis on verbs. See, so that's the challenge, and the faithfulness to the original word is at stake. Okay, and these are now the kinds of translations, and I have give some samples there. Not all the translations or versions are there, just example. The first translation is called formal translation. This formal translation is a word-for-word equivalency. For example, in Hebrew, the language is Hebrew. What is the equivalent word of this word? Equivalent word. So word-for-word equivalency translation. Formal. This is more exact and literal rendering of the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek languages. And the readings are wooden, static quality in cadence may be lost. You experience that when you read King James Version, it's a little bit awkward, you see, because of the 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 grammar seems to be not good because it was translated word for word there. Okay? So the flow of the reading is not really good, but at least all the concepts there are actually put there or translated. The other translation is called dynamic translation, meaning for meaning equivalency. So this is not the word for word, but it's the meaning of the phrase. Okay, the interpreter, the translator, I should say, restructures the translations into idiomatic usage that represents the equivalent thought or meaning. There are advantages here to the idiomatic contemporaneity, readability, and clarity. A good example that in New International Version, when you read it, the flow is very nice. The idioms, the expressions in our contemporary times are very clear. However, there is a drawback there. Interpretation may be misleading or erroneous depending upon the correctness or incorrectness of the translator. So you have there examples of, by the way, let me go back to the examples here of formal translation. According to the author there, the source, www.blueletterbible.org, an example of formal translations, American Standard Version of 1901, and then New American Standard Bible, and English Standard Version. According to the source, the King James Version, American Standard Version, Young's Literal Translation, New American Bible, New King James Versions are more literal translations. They belong to formal translations, but these versions and the red box are more literal. Okay? In as far as other specific texts of the Bible, they translated it more literally. Okay? Example of dynamic are New International Versions, Reader's Version, NIV is also there, Revised English Bible, Good News Translations, New Living Translation, Contemporary English Versions, and so on and so forth. Okay? And the last one is paraphrase translations. Far more free from the original. Okay? And for devotional use. It cannot be used for Bible study. Okay? Because the words there that are necessary to connect one after the other are lost. Okay? It's more on interpretations rather than translation. So be careful with this. Okay? So that's all the three kinds of translations. You can choose which one. Based on these studies, okay, I recommend that you choose a version that is close to the original, in which the publishing does not lean to one denominational group. Our study guide uses New King James Version and sometimes King James Version. I personally use also New English Version and also New King James Version. Okay, so let's have some reflections. Verse from Proverbs 4:7, International Standard Version. Wisdom is of utmost importance. Therefore get wisdom, and with all your effort, work to acquire understanding. Let me paraphrase that. In all your efforts to study the Bible, see to it that you understand. Other versions of this translation is, see to it you get insight. Something that would speak to you personally, okay, out of your study. That's the message for us. You may choose all this. We do not say you don't need all this. If you have all these translations, fine, much better. But if you do heavy Bible study, it should be close to the original, okay? For devotional, you can use dynamic. In my practice, I usually use King James. But if I don't understand the King James rendering, I use dynamics so I can understand the passage clearly. So I rephrase this one. I study the Bible with all my efforts to acquire understanding. That's very important because when we understand the concept, according to theories, okay, psychological theory, it would touch our feelings. And when our feelings are touched, our feelings would produce behavior. And the behavior would reinforce the concept. And that becomes our character. So I hope we strongly agree that with all our efforts, we need to get insight for understanding. Our Father in heaven, thank you that in this simple presentation, we can be guided as to what kind of translation or versions we should choose from. We can compare all these translations in order for us to better understand your word. That would give us inspiration and hope as we face crises ahead of us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Lift up the trumpet and